You just had a one-on-one with Netanyahu recently. When the cameras are off, yeah, I'm sure you had at least a few minutes to speak to him. Did he shed any light as to what he truly believes is next for the Palestinian people when Hamas is destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth?
Well, yeah, I've met him quite a few times over the years, and probably going back about 20 years. I can tell you quite a funny story about him, if I may. Some years ago, I wrote a book called The Strange Death of Europe about immigration and the challenges to Western societies, from the challenges from mass illegal migration. And I saw Netanyahu a little while after the book came out, and he said, are you writing another book? And I said, yes. And he said, you should know something about your last one. He said, there was a mistake in it. And it was about me. I thought, oh, hell. And then I was trying to think. I think I only mentioned him a couple of times in the book, and I remembered. I relayed in the book a conversation that Netanyahu had with Angela Merkel in 2015 when the migration wave was coming into Germany. And I got the call readout from enough people that I could trust it and put it into the book, which was that Angela Merkel said to Netanyahu, you, Israel, are the only country in the world that has ever had to absorb people by proportion of population at such a rate. How did you do it? And I was told that, Netanyahu had explained the absorption centers, the language, blah, 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 blah. And then I treated myself, I said, Prime Minister Netanyahu was probably too diplomatic to mention to Angela Merkel that he had an advantage, and that in the years to come, she and Germany would discover that most of the arrivals were not Lutherans. And anyhow, so I realized that was what Bibi was talking about, and he said, the thing you said I didn't say to Angela, I did. So, anyhow, he's published a plan now about what happens the day after. We covered a bit of it on camera. I think everybody realizes that it's not easy and it requires a regional solution. But the regional partners are very hard to find. If you had a sort of Kissinger-like figure on the international stage, you might have somebody who could pull in, the Israelis to do the securities and say the air cover, the Emiratis to do the education, the Saudis to pay the bills. I don't know. You could, but as I mentioned earlier, the Palestinians have been given to Israel as a problem. And one of the cruelties, I think, of that is that if you don't have an answer to the question of the Palestinians and their potential statehood or otherwise, it's very cruel to say to somebody, here's an insoluble problem that we can't solve and it's your job to solve it. And that is what has been happening. And so unless there's regional buy-in, I imagine that Israel will have to do a lot of this on its own, but it doesn't want to. One of the saddest conversations I've had in recent months was in the middle of the Gaza a few months ago, and I was just up from Shifa, and right in the middle of the strip, and I was speaking to a colonel in the IDF, and being British, I thought I'd be polite and pass the time of day. So I said something like, "Do you come here often?" I mean, the other option for small talk in Britain is to say, "Have you come far?" Or, "What do you do?" Anyhow, I said to him, "Do you come here often?" And he said, "I was last here in 2005, pulling family friends from their homes. And here I am, 18 years later, back." Again, I just expect a certain degree of decency and understanding in the international community about the challenge that Israel faces with the Gaza, and why we have ended up in this situation where a patch of land that used to be run by Egypt — I have an Egyptian friend who was born in Gaza as an Egyptian — why Israel is the one country in the world that's meant to solve this insoluble problem. Especially when, in my view, the Palestinians were given a state in 2005. And I do think at some point it's just like, how many states do you want? And it's a serious question. Like, somebody said to me the other day in Israel, said to me, "Well, what would your plan be? What would you do?" And it was slightly facetious, but not that facetious. I said, I would give the Palestinians one small thing to do, like run a kindergarten, and see if you can avoid the temptation to teach the toddlers to kill Jews. Just see. Or maybe a hospital, a little or nursing center, and see if you can resist the urge to fill it with grenades. Just see. When the Shifa, it's not the Shifa hospital, the Shifa was entered by the IDF the other month, you probably noticed that there were quite a lot of Kalashnikovs, RPGs, grenades, and so on found. And Jeremy Bowen of the BBC was interviewed on air, and the interviewer said, there seems to have been a command center, doesn't it? Because, all of this weaponry. And Jeremy Bowen said, well, it's not impossible that the guns belong to the security department at the hospital. And I wrote back and I said, sure, and maybe the grenades belong to the cardiology department. But it's a serious challenge. Like, literally, if you want a state and you've just been given one and you've made it a terror enterprise, and if 75 to 80% of the Palestinians in the West Bank, if there's an election tomorrow, would vote Hamas, I would not give them a state before I saw if they could do some basic things like education, for goodness sake. We've known this for years about the Palestinian textbooks. The international community, like UNRWA, has not just done nothing, it has exacerbated the problem of the teaching of hate. Anyhow, sorry, that was a long answer.